Now let's talk about bibliographies. These can be a little tricky, so it's important that you establish a sort of a good fundamental base so that you get a robust result so LaTeX can serve you well. Right, let's have a look at the notes. Bibliography. In LaTeX, it's handled as a sort of enumerated list with labels. And I'm going to do the simplest version of a bibliography first, and then talk about how you use more sophisticated tools to help you manage it for your career. Okay, so the simplest thing is just to create the list yourself. And when you do that, this is the format you need. You use an environment called the bibliography. And you go begin the bibliography, and then you give it a number within a pair of braces and just put 99. That's almost good enough. If you have over 100 items in your bibliography, use 999. Then what do you do in your bibliography? Well, it's like an enumerated list. So each bibliography item is prefixed by \bib item, and then in braces a label. So in essence, that is rather like a \item \label, in that it starts the bibliographic item, and it gives it the label, namely bib name 1 or whatever. And then you follow that with the description of the article in whatever is the standard format you need. Then you go on to the second entry in the bibliography and do the same thing. Third entry, fourth entry, whatever. Okay, so that will typically typeset the bibliography with the heading references and the associated labels, which you can then cross-reference to. So go back to Fractals 24, which we used with hypertext linking, and that's what I've coded at the end. Right? Begin the bibliography, end the bibliography, and then each item is \bib item, a label. The label is just the surname of the author. Probably want a more sophisticated label. The convention is usually surname, year, and sometimes people also use a leading keyword in the title. And they sort of mesh them together into the label. Okay, yeah, each item. So, book by Mandelbrot, B.B. Mandelbrot's the author. The book title is usually italics, the year 1983, that sort of thing. I can't remember the details for the Richardson and Kornberg thing, so I bailed out there. I did add one extra. By default, the references is not added to the table of contents. If you want it to, then you put a command like that. Typeset. And you would have already seen this, right? Because we looked at it. So there's the list. The default for the bibliography is a numbered list. They're 1, 2, 3. References is the default title. And that's it. Okay, how do you reference the bibliography? Well, you do not use cref. That doesn't work. You have to use cite. So Kornberg is in the bibliography because we produce his quote. So at the end of the quote, we cite that this quote comes from Hans Kornberg, and we cite the source of it, except apart from the fact I can't remember it. Right, first time we run LaTeX, that cross-reference won't be resolved. The second time it is. And you see the default for the citation is that gets translated into square brackets 2 end of square brackets, where 2 is whatever number it is in the citation list. And as you add or subtract items from the site, from the bibliography, that number 2 may well change. Anyway, remember you need the \cite command to cite things in the bibliography. Same on the next line in the abstract. Mandelbrot, cite Mandel, that produces square brackets 1. Note, both of these citations, there are non-breaking spaces because it is abhorrent to have Benoit Mandelbrot at the end of a line and square brackets 1 at the start of the next line. That's just awful. Don't do it. Put in these non-breaking spaces. Now, what else do we need to do? Yeah, this is the Vancouver style of citing with numbers in square brackets. If you prefer the Harvard style, I'll talk about that later, but in the Harvard style, you would not use those non-breaking spaces. So what have we covered? Achieve the citations with cite, does the square brackets, that's the default, non-breaking space, we've done that. Now, there is a widespread odious perversion in the writing. I don't know how it spread. Stamp it out straight away. Do whatever you can to get rid of it. And that is of writing in your sentences citations which result in phrases such as into or by 3. This is just wrong. And the reason is that the bracketed number of a citation in the Vancouver system is just a pointer to more information. It must not be part of the meaning of the sentence. So, for example, in my sentence over here, where I reference Benoit Mandelbrot, square brackets 1, I did not say by 1. Yet that is what a huge number of people write. And it's just terrible. It doesn't mean anything. It's by Mandelbrot. He's the person. It's by him. Name the person. It's not by square brackets 1. Square brackets 1 is just telling us where to look for more information about what particular work Mandelbrot did it in. And the answer is, it's in the book, The Fractal Geometry of Nature, when you go there. So the sort of things which are bad are to say things as expressed in the following ditty by \cite rich, because that will just be by square bracket 2 in our case. Instead, you name the author explicitly. It's by Lewis Fry Richardson, and then you put the cite. Some people write things like blah, 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 correlation coefficient, comma, refer to cite. So that gets typeset as refer to square brackets 11, whatever it happens to be. Again, that square brackets has become part of the meaning of the sentence. Now, for a start, you don't need to say refer to. The fact that it's in square brackets is a pointer, which means you're referring to it. So refer to is completely redundant. So the solution here is just to delete that stuff and replace it by a non-breaking space. So the sentence finishes quite happily, correlation coefficient, full stop. And if as a reader you need to see more information, you then click on the link to the bibliography. And that's it. Okay, and you can test whether your writing's okay, because your sentences must make sense independent of whether the bracketed citation appears or not. Okay, now, constructing your bibliography like this is fine for your first report. And if that's all you want to learn, that's good, that's okay. But as soon as you start writing a second or a third, collaborating with a colleague, it's a bit tedious. Keep keeping on trying to pull out the information of the specific items you need, remembering to get them in the first place, and then if the citation gets dropped, remembering to delete it, all that sort of hassle. So LaTeX provides a way to manage all that business of storing bibliographic information in a central database for you, in your central database, extracting it when needed and omitting it when it's not needed. And that's BibTeX. And there's two versions of this. BibTeX, which we'll first describe, is the traditional approach, and you'll need to know it because a lot of publishers, for example, are still using BibTeX. A lot of your mature age colleagues are still using BibTeX. But the modern approach is to use something called BibLaTeX, which I'll also introduce you to. So what does BibTeX do? Firstly, you prepare a database of all stuff that you've read and that you might cite in future, whether it's next week, next decade. I've still got stuff from 40 years ago that's still in my citation database, and occasionally I cite them. Okay, now what's in your database? It's a plain text database, so you can read it yourself in any text editor. You can create it yourself in any text editor. It's pretty easy to do. The format's pretty straightforward. There are interfaces, graphical user interfaces into these. And they are usually useful. There's things like JabRef. There is, where is it? BibDesk on the Mac and tools like that. But at its heart, it's a plain text file which you can create and edit as you please. The entries in that text file look more or less like this. So they start with at and then the nature of the bibliographic entry. So if it's a research paper, it would be called at article. If it's a book, it would be at book. If it's in a conference proceedings, it's at in proceedings. That sort of thing. Then you have a pair of braces surrounding the information relevant to that article. So there's the starting brace and there's the ending brace, right? And that surrounds all the fields. The first field is the label by which you're going to cite the article. So here, Roberts 94A, surname, year, and I use A, B, C, D because that's what I started with. As I said, many people often use, instead of that A, that'd be a leading keyword in the title. Right, that's just the label name. Then that is followed by a comma-separated list of fields, such as the author field, where you go author equals, and then in brace, the author or authors. So this first article's just got one author. This second article's got two. You separate multiple authors by the keyword and. Okay, second, the journal. That's needed, Australasian Science or Physica, whatever it happens to be. Then, and it doesn't, the order is immaterial. You need to specify the year. Year equals 1994, whatever. Month is optional. Month is April. The title you'll need. Again, put that into braces. Importance of being fractal. This title is the unbiased estimation of multifractal dimensions of finite data sets. Doesn't matter whether you put it on one line or multiple lines. as long as these braces get balanced, that they limit the fields. And then pages. So pages equal to 23 will just be for one page. If there's a range of pages, you go pages equal to whatever the range is, and the dash in between those numbers should be an N dash, which you obtain by putting 2 dashes in a row. Okay, so there's a text file like that. And the point is you create it and you just keep adding to it over your lifetime. I've got, I don't know how, something like 4,000 entries in my database. And as I said, to access it, you may prefer a graphical user interface such as JabReps or BibTeX. There are more sophisticated packages such as Mendeley or Zotero. And although I use Zotero to help me draft entries into my database, I can't stand using it. It just provides, it's too constraining, but it's up to you. If you prefer Zotero to do everything for you, fine. Okay, so you've prepared the database. Then what do? Well, in your LaTeX document, you've got to do 2 things. You first off have to tell LaTeX what style of bibliography you're going to do. And the default style, the plain style, is the numbers in square brackets. So \bibliography plain produces what we've seen in these fractals documents. Then you've got to specify the bibliography, where the bibliography information is. And I forgot to say that this bibliography information goes into a .bib file. I've called mine ajr.bib. Call it whatever you like. You can have multiple files. But let's just suppose you've got one. You go bibliography ajr or whatever, and it will look for ajr.bib or whatever.bib. And that command actually does 2 things. It not only tells LaTeX where to look, but that is also the spot in your source where the bibliography will be typeset. Then you just use cite as you would in the document. Then the fact that you have cited an article will get written out into the auxiliary file. And so it'll be sitting in an auxiliary file, what things you've cited. All right, and the information will be the label that you've used. You know, labels like that. So after executing LaTeX at least once, there is the information about what articles you've cited in the auxiliary file. So you then execute BibTeX, because BibTeX looks in that auxiliary file, determines what references are needed from your database that you've specified in the bibliography, and it creates a BBL file. And what the BBL file is, it's a file that looks like that. So it's the bibliography, hence BBL. So then, right, run LaTeX, run BibTeX, which generates the BBL file, run LaTeX again, and it will see there's a BBL file there. It will input it in and typeset the bibliography. Sounds complicated, but it's all worth it, and it's quite straightforward once you set it up and got it working. Okay, so if you don't want to do it in your first document, don't bother, but certainly once you get into the second and third, do it. Okay, so what about the style of bibliography? Well, the default plain style of numbers is not all that useful. So, and many people need to know how to use Harvard because that's style, because that's standard in their field. So let me give a plug for Harvard. Harvard has a big advantage, and that is that citations are invariant, more or less, from article to article. So for example, when I'm reading an article, if I see the citation to Smith 1987, I say, oh, that paper by Smith, I know that. And that allows me to connect up to the article, the content of the article, a lot closer because I know something about it. And in the Harvard system, you know, it's Smith 1987 in all articles that I read that refer to that particular article. It's an invariant. And invariants are beautiful. They help me as a reader understand. And as a writer, you should appreciate that and take advantage of it. And so I recommend you do use Harvard. Now, what's the alternative? If you don't use the Harvard system and you use the square brackets notation, the citation would be Smith square brackets 13, or simply 13, which is even worse. The square brackets 13, if I see that in an article, I've got no idea what that refers to. Yes, in principle, I can go and look up the bibliography, but in practice, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. I hardly ever do that. It interrupts the flow of reading. It interrupts the flow of understanding. So in principle, it's okay, it's resolvable, it's precise, but to a human reader, it's useless. Smith 13 is nearly useless, right? In the context of the document, I might say, oh, article by Smith. I wonder if that's one I know of. But you know, Smith has probably written a dozen papers in that area, so it could be any one of a dozen that's referenced. And I haven't got a clue. I'd have to look to the bibliography again. I have to interrupt the reading. Right? Your reader doesn't do that. Using the square brackets makes it harder for your reader. Prefer the Harvard. So how do you get Harvard? Do it as follows. The bib database is exactly the same. You don't have to change that. You can swap between Harvard, plain, any other variety of citations that you like. You still have the same bib database. What you do is you tell LaTeX that you want a different format. And the usual way for Harvard is to say in the preamble, use package natbib. Then for the bibliography style, instead of saying plain, which generates the square bracketed citations, use bibliography style AGSM. You might wonder what's AGSM stand for. And I can tell you, it stands for Australian Government Style Manual. Then specify your bibliography as before, and start using the cite command as before, but recognize that it'll be typeset differently. So whenever you want to typeset something like Robertson Cronin 1996 in your sentence, you use \cite command. Just as for Harvard, it'll just appear different, that's all. If you want the citation to be parenthetical, to be not part of the sentence, not contributing to the meaning of the sentence, then you use \cite square brackets, and then in braces Roberts 1994. Okay, so it's a little bit more sophisticated. It empowers you to do things. These square brackets also allow you to add a little bit of extra information inside the parenthetical citation, such as if you want to refer to page 15 in the article, or you want to say that's just an example, you include that information about page 15 or PG inside the square brackets. And then it'll get typeset inside the parentheses. Now, when you do that, you will find that the default style for URLs in NatBib is very ugly. I think this is a legacy of poor decisions that were made in the 90s when they thought they had to make URLs stand out because they were new, exciting things, and really it just looks ugly. So how do you make them look beautiful in a modern scenario? Two things. In the preamble, put use package URL, and then include /let /Harvard URL to URL. Right, and that's because NatBib uses the command Harvard URL to typeset a URL, and all we're doing with that let is to say don't use the NatBib's URL typesetter. Go and use the one you get from the package URL. Now, okay. And just as in the square bracket citation, do try to avoid physically impossible statements such as predicted in Rosenblatt 2001. Well, I'm sorry, the prediction isn't in Rosenblatt. It's in the article authored by Rosenblatt, which might be a bit long-winded. So, but whatever, don't say in Rosenblatt because it's not in him. Right? Rosenblatt is a person. So it is as predicted by Rosenblatt 2001. Okay. Right, so that's a first burst on BibTeX, and we're going to continue that in the next burst, but we'll stop there.